Crossroads Cemetery, hence the connection with the cemetery today. Ellis.
Check, 1, 2. You can hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning.
Morning.
How's everyone doing today? Pastor Lindsay do a good service today? Yes. I bet she does. Everyone get enough coffee and sweets to tide them through? My name is Ellis Michaels. I live in Pitcairn. In real life, I'm a registered nurse at Jefferson Hospital, but I have a very unusual hobby. I restore and repair historic grave markers. That is one of the reasons I'm here today, to present you some information about your cemetery over in the church over there. So let me just start off by saying I can talk about this for hours and hours, but I promised Pastor I would only do 6 hours today. Burials in the land occupied by the Crossroads Presbyterian Cemetery likely began about 1796, when Mary Clugston Johnston died and was buried on the land that her husband, Captain Robert Johnson, had been granted for his service in the French and Indian Wars. Sadly, if any grave monument had been erected, it has long since vanished. In 1800, Robert Johnson had 1 acre of his land set aside for burials of the family in the area. Soon other families began to bury their deceased in the cemetery, often just claiming individual sections for their own use. Other families who owned land adjacent to the burial ground soon began burying their dead in their own plots. In 1834, the Crossroads Presbyterian Church was formed on a 1 acre tract of land between the cemetery and the township road. Prior to 1834, there were an estimated 50 or so burials in the cemeteries. After the formation of the church, the family burial sections became more in demand and the sites began to grow. Starting in the 1870s, additional land in the lower section of the hill was added and the site became known as the Crossroads Cemetery. Later, 2 larger sections were added, and the first in 1910, the second in 1925. Most of the earliest stones have long since either been destroyed or removed. Most of the remaining stones that you will find date from the 1840s to 1860s. These stones are mostly marble or lime, and many of these early stones have been found to be severely damaged or eroded and in need of repair. What is my interest in your cemetery? Well, I drive past it every day on Sunday on my way to church at the Methodist church, and I saw the condition of especially the really old marble stones. And I just thought, you know what, this is something I can try to do. So I got in contact with your cemetery committee, especially Martha Wintersgill, and got permission to try to start doing some work. Now, why do I do this kind of work, and why do I buy this kind of equipment? Well, over the years, I've had a great interest in history and genealogy. And most of my family have been here since the 1600s. I tell my children that we were the first ones to be thrown out of Europe as soon as Columbus came back. Now, the problem is a lot of my family is buried in the middle of cornfields, in the middle of woods, and their stones have become damaged. You can't get the monument companies who would either know how to repair them or even have an interest in repairing them. They want to sell you a new stone, which I understand. They're a business, that's how they make money, that's how they stay in business. But then you lose the historic value of the stones. So over the years, I've taken workshops, I've read many books, I've read everything on the internet, watched many videos to try to learn as best I can how to restore these stones. And this is the one lesson I want everyone to learn today, and I'm going to ask this question several times. What is the most important thing in doing gravestone restoration is?
Patience.
Do no harm. So what's the #1 rule in gravestone restoration?
Do no harm.
If you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. There's lots of examples of good intentions but bad techniques. Nothing makes me cry than walking through a cemetery and finding a beautiful old stone that someone used liquid nails to put together. Which leads me to point #2. Take the time to learn the approved methods of preservation. There is nothing sold in Lowe's, there is nothing sold in Home Depot that is appropriate for gravestone restoration. Even though these are stone, they've been sitting out in the elements for 150 years or more. They're actually quite fragile, and using the wrong materials to try to repair them will just make more problems than you're trying to fix. So only use sources of products from approved sources. And this one is very important as well. Always ask permission before you do anything. You know, sometimes people get a little funny if they see you digging in a cemetery for some reason. That is why Martha can tell you that I am constantly harassing her by email, because I have to have something that says, yes, we know you're planning on doing this. Yes, we give you permission, just in case the police are called. And I actually don't mind if the police are called, because that means people are watching out for the cemetery and they care enough to make sure no one is doing any vandalism. So one of the early stones I did for your church was the grave of Susan McMunn Brown. Susan was born in 1799 somewhere in Pennsylvania. She was the daughter of Daniel and Martha McMunn. She was also called Susanna, and she married John Brown, not the one who raided Harper's Ferry, probably before 1830. In the 1850 census for Franklin Township, Westmoreland County, John and Susan were both 51 years old. They owned a farm that was valued at $1,500, and they had children James, Daniel, Martha, John, Margaret, Henry, and David. The 1860s, they were living on a farm in Penn Township, and unfortunately, her husband John died in 1866. And then Susan died 17th of January, 1868, in her 69th year, and was buried next to her husband. So this is how I found her stone. That's all you could see of it. So I asked permission, and I kept in mind, what is the #1 rule of gravestone preservation?
Do no harm.
Do no harm. So I got permission. I thought about what I was going to do and what I should do. So I excavated the stone, and it was broken into several different pieces, including a sizable chunk that was missing. I couldn't find it anywhere. Using the appropriate methods of restoration, using appropriate products, and creating a new base and foundation for the stone, I was able to return it to an upright position. And that is now the stone as it sits now. So it went from here to there. And I do all of this pro bono, just because for me it's an odd hobby. Now, I'm a member of an organization called the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. We were formed as a fraternal organization from the from the Grand Army of the Republic. We're dedicated to preserving the history and legacy of veterans who fought to save the Union during the American Civil War. The Grand Army of the Republic was originally formed in 1866 to help Civil War veterans to maintain the ties of brotherhood and to offer fraternal assistance whenever possible. The Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War was organized in 1881 in an effort to continue the mission after the passing of the original GAR members. They found out that I was doing the cemetery restoration in Crossroads, and they suspected there were veterans buried in the site because of its age. So they asked me to investigate and try to determine, were there Civil War veterans buried in your cemetery, and could we figure out which ones were? So there's really no list so much written. So what we did was, during the 1930s, as part of Franklin Roosevelt's Public Works program, he paid unemployed people to walk through cemeteries and to write down people who they thought were Civil War veterans and any current information that they could find about them. So these are now online at Ancestry.com. Someone scanned them and put them in. So using these records, I found the names of 64 veterans that were said to be buried in the cemetery. Adding additional information from a list from the archives of the Monroeville Historical Society, I added an additional 17 names to the list. This gave me a total of 81 possible Civil War veterans that were thought to be buried in the cemetery. But while looking through these 81 names, 7 turned out to be duplicates, 2 were proven not to actually have been buried in the cemetery, and 10 I could find no indication that they actually served in the war. So this left me with proof that there are 53 confirmed burials of Civil War veterans in your cemetery. Now, I always make a disclaimer. I am not an expert on the Civil War. I can't tell you when the battles occurred. I can't tell you what general led what charge. My interest is in identifying the graves of the veterans and trying to make sure that they are properly marked and honored as best as I can. So when I find a veteran's grave that is need of upkeep, I either try to restore the stone or I work with the cemetery and the Veterans Administration, which is a lot of fun, to try to obtain replacement stones to properly honor the graves. Using this, I was able to obtain and install 15 permanent granite grave markers from the VA. In addition to just replacing the markers, I want to know, well, who was this person? I try to find out something about their lives. To me, it makes it more personal than I just put this stone in. So for today's presentation, I've chosen 7 of these veterans to discuss their lives, their experiences in the war, and their gravestone. But let me start off briefly by talking about what was it like to be a soldier in the Civil War. Daily life was harsh and demanding, marked by blends of absolute boredom and sheer terror. Routine camp life, grueling marches, periods of intense battle, and constant anxieties about survival and the war's outcome. The daily routine was characterized by drills, marching, weapon cleaning, and camp duties like cooking, cleaning, and maintaining equipment. Soldiers lived in tents, often shared with the fellow soldier, and were responsible for their personal belongings and uniform. All of this, you as a private were paid $13 a month. If you made sergeant, they increased it to $17 a month. The food was monotonous and consisted of mostly hardtack, which I researched it. It is literally flour, salt, and water that is then baked into this extremely hard biscuit. I actually have an example of it. You would have to either soak in water or soak in your coffee for 15 minutes before it would be soft enough for you to bite. But it had a very long shelf life, was light, and could be carried during your marches. So in addition to hardtack, there'd be salt pork, beans, and coffee. But food shortages were common, and soldiers often had to forage for their subsistence. This is an example of a foraging hat. you'll see the real hat that they would have would have been much smaller, but they made them deeper so that you could gather food wherever you could find it. Such foraging hat. Disease was a significant threat. Typhoid and dysentery being a major killer. Camp hygiene was often poor, contributing to the spread of illness. Marches were long, arduous, and often conducted under harsh weather conditions. Soldiers carried heavy equipment, including knapsacks, blankets, and weapons, making the marching physically demanding. The reality of battle was often... Is that me making that noise?
Yeah.
Oh.
Might be the batteries.
Might be the batteries. The reality of battle was often brutal and dramatic. Soldiers often faced the horrors of close quarters combat, the noise of smoke and gunfire, and the sights and sounds of death and injury. And always was the fear of death, either by battle or disease. The Civil War soldier always had the daily reminder of death nearby. You know what, let me just turn this off, and because that clicking is going to drive me insane. So, that was their life. So, who are some of the soldiers that I was able to look at in your cemetery? Well, one was the son of Susan McMunn, Susan McMunn Brown, who I had restored her stone. Her son was John Brown. He was born about 1835 in Westmoreland County, and in the 1850 of Franklin in Westmoreland County, he's recorded as a 15-year-old boy living on his parents' farm along with his 4 brothers and 2 sisters. Can everyone hear me? Huh? Louder? Let me see if there's a way to quickly change these batteries.
What size are they?
Double A's. I might have some. Sorry, everybody. Do we have any double A's?
He's gonna go get some.
Go get some? All right. Let me just try to yell louder then. So John Brown is a 15-year-old boy living in his parents' farm with 4 brothers and 2 sisters. The census indicated that in 1850 he did attend school part-time during the year. John enlisted with the 204th Pennsylvania Regiment, also known as the 5th Pennsylvania Heavy Artillery, on the 2nd of September, 1864. The regiment was stationed in Virginia to protect Washington, D.C., and the railroad supply lines of the Union Army fighting further to the south. While there, the unit participated in several skirmishes and battles with the Confederate forces attempting to cut supply lines and attack Washington, D.C. But as unfortunate with many of the soldiers of the Civil War, John Brown died of typhus in the regimental hospital in Virginia on 5th of January, 1865. Disease killed far more Civil War soldiers than battlefield wounds. For every 3 soldiers killed in a battle, 5 soldiers died of disease. Roughly 2/3 of the over 690,000 deaths during the war were attributed to disease. In the case of John Brown, his body was able to be returned to the family due to the recent advancements in the techniques for embalming. Morticians would frequently follow. All right, let's see. Can you hear me now? Yay! In the case of John Brown, his body was able to be returned to the family due to the recent advancement of embalming. Morticians would follow the camps and set up embalming shops where for $100 a soldier could prepay for his embalming should he fall. and the mortician would often solicit the fee from the family if he found a soldier who had not prepaid beforehand. General Grant eventually banned the embalmers from following the Army as he felt it caused low morale. In any case, John Brown's body was able to be returned to his family for burial in the Crossroads Cemetery. So I could not find his stone, but I figured he was probably buried near his mother. So I used a special probe, and digging around, I found his stone. It had fallen over and was actually several inches under the ground, completely buried. And probing around and digging a little bit more, I was actually able to find his original base, which I was able to bring back to the surface. It was about 12 inches down. As the graves collapse, the base will fall and then everything else falls over. So using appropriate methods of conservation, because what is the number one rule of gravestone conservation? Do no harm. I was able to restore John Brown's grave marker to an upright position. And what is important about John Brown's marker is this would have been a privately purchased stone. His mother probably paid to have this stone put in. And you can tell because on the top there's the flag wrapped around the flagstaff, and behind it is a Civil War musket. And so I wanted to make sure, even though this stone was slightly damaged for the inscription, it was too beautiful of a stone to try to just discard. So I made sure to try to repair it. So our second soldier, Samuel Cashdollar. Samuel was born 8th of June, 1841 in Allegheny County, the eldest son of William and Eleanor Smith Cashdollar. His father, William, was a farmer, and Samuel was living with his parents in Patton, which was the township of Monroeville, Pitcairn, and I'm not sure where else, in Allegheny County in the 1850 and 1860 census. Samuel enlisted in Company E, the 140th Pennsylvania Infantry, on the 22nd of August, 1862. The 140th was a real fighting battle unit. They were involved in many of the major battles, including Chancellorsville. He was at Gettysburg, Spotsylvania, Petersburg, Jerusalem Plank Road. He was at the Battle of the Wilderness, and he was at Appomattox. Samuel was wounded twice, once at Gettysburg and once again at the Wilderness. According to the 1890 Special Census of Surviving Civil War Veterans, his wounds were described as gunshot wounds to the shoulder and to the side. Samuel was honorably discharged 31st of May, 1865. He returned home and married Mary Ann Ramsey. They appear in the 1870 census for North Versailles with 2 children, Sidney and Elliot, and Samuel was working as a laborer. They had 4 more known children, Harry, Ella, Annie, and Alice, before Mary died sometime before the 1880 census. Around 1882, Samuel remarried Phoebe Jane Van Horn and had 2 more known children, Clyde and Ida. In the 1910 census, Samuel was 68 years old, living in the area and working as a laborer at odd jobs. He died 12th of January 1916 from bronchopneumonia at the home of his daughter, Mrs. Sidney Critchlow, on 9th Avenue in Munhall. He was buried in the Crossroads Cemetery in Monroeville on the 14th of January 1916. I had trouble finding his stone, and I soon found out why. This was all that was left of his grave marker. It was completely off the base. I don't know where the base ended up, and it has been severely damaged. It was not able to be salvaged, in my opinion. So I worked with the cemetery committee and with the VA, and we were able to obtain him a brand new granite upright stone, which hopefully should last for many, many years to come. Our next soldier, David McMunn. David was born 30th March 1841, although in the census records the year of birth seems to vary a lot, which was common. He was the fifth child of Daniel and Martha George McMunn. David appeared in the 1850 census with his parents, 6 brothers and sisters, where his father was working as a farmer. On the 9th of August, 1862, David and his older brother Daniel enlisted in Company I of the 123rd Pennsylvania Infantry for a 9-month service. When the war first started, they didn't think it was going to last very long. So they would ask people to just sign up for 90 days. They realized things weren't going so well, so then they started asking you to sign up for 9 months. Then later, you would have to sign up for 3-year service. His regiment fought at the Battle of Fredericksburg and at Chancellorsville. They were honorably discharged at the expiration of their 9-month service on 13th of May, 1863. But on 29th of August, 1864, David McMunn re-enlisted as a corporal with Battery E, the 204th Pennsylvania Regiment, 5th Heavy Artillery, the same unit that John Brown was in. The unit was stationed in Virginia to protect Washington, D.C. and the railroad supply lines of the Union Army. They were in several minor battles while there, and in the spring of 1865, they were sent to the battlefield at Bull Run and tasked with burying the nearly 2,000 dead soldiers from the battle. David was honorably discharged at the end of the war on the 30th June, 1865. He returned home, married Sarah S. Christie, and they appear together in the 1870 census for North Versailles, along with 2 sons, William and George, and David was working as a laborer. According to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, on the 25th of November, 1879, David McMunn was struck and instantly killed by a passing train near the Larimer Station in Turtle Creek. The newspaper originally incorrectly identified him as John McCune, but the next day they corrected his name to David McMunn. So here was his marker that I was able to find. And this is an example of improper conservation technique, because what is our #1 rule? Do no harm. My guess is, because this was an original VA stone, which really should have been very high quality marble and not damaged. But earlier in the 1900s, people thought you would use bleach to clean the stones. And it did, it made your stone beautiful white. But the sodium hydroxide in the bleach weakens the bond of the calcium carbonate in the stones, and every time it rains, a little bit sloughs off, and eventually you're left to where you can't really read the face anymore. So I worked with the cemetery committee and with the VA and obtained them a new stone. And I pulled this old stone out, and I found something very unusual about this stone. And this is the only stone I've ever run across. There was writing underneath where the VA had carved his name. And I had to take it home and use special lights, and it's a poem. The family must have had this poem inscribed on the stone before it was installed. And the stone reads, "A light from our family is gone, a voice we loved is stilled, a place is vacant in our home, which never can be filled." So working with the VA, I wasn't able to get this reinscribed on the stone, but I was able to get him a brand new granite marker to properly mark his grave. Our next soldier, Elliot Wilson, was born in Patton Township in sometime around 1836. He was the son of James and Ann Wilson. Elliot was recorded in the 1850 census as age 14, attending school. His father, James, worked as a laborer, and his mother, 4 brothers and 3 sisters were also in the household. Elliot enlisted as a private in Company A, the 101st Pennsylvania Infantry, on the 14th of April, 1862. During his service, he saw actions in the battles of Williamsburg, Fair Oaks, Malvern Hill, and multiple smaller engagements. When his enlistment was up, he re-enlisted, and on the 21st of March, 1864, less than 1 month later, he and his entire unit were captured by the Confederates at the Battle of Plymouth, North Carolina. Elliot and all of the enlisted men of his unit were sent. Has anyone ever heard of Andersonville?
Yeah.
Elliot spent over a year at Andersonville. The commissioned officers were sent to other camps, but poor Elliot had to go to Andersonville. Now, Andersonville, or Camp Sumter as it was known officially, held more prisoners at any given time than any of the other Confederate military prisons. It was built in early 1864, and the first prisoners were incarcerated in late February 1864. During the next month, approximately 400 prisoners a day arrived. By the end of August 1864, 33,000 men were penned in an area originally meant for only 10,000 prisoners, and they never had a chance to build permanent buildings, so they had to do makeshift tents if they were lucky. There were more than 45,000 Union soldiers throughout the 1 year of operation confined there, and of these, almost 13,000, or 28%, died from disease, poor sanitation, malnutrition, overcrowding, and exposure to the elements. After the war ended, the commander of the camp, Henry Wirtz, was executed for war crimes by hanging. Wirtz was the only Confederate officer to be executed for war crimes during the Civil War. Elliot managed to survive the harsh condition of the camp and was released when the camp was liberated. Now, I wasn't sure about showing this next slide, but I think it's important to show just how harsh it was. Elliot was in for about a year. This man, they actually did a photograph of after he was released. This was Private Philip Haddle of Company I, the 51st Pennsylvania, after his release. And he died within the month after being released. So I had to look around. I did eventually find Elliot's stone. He returned to the family in Patton Township, and he died less than 2 years after returning. He was buried in his family plot at the Crossroads Presbyterian Cemetery. Now, his stone is almost impossible to read. The only reason I knew it was his because I was able to read the date of death. And it was in the Wilson family plot. Now, because this stone looked like all the rest of the stones in the family plot, I didn't want to remove it, so I obtained a ground level plot to put stone to put in front of it, that also marked his service as a prisoner of war. Everyone still with me?
Yeah.
No one's asleep yet?
No.
The next soldier I'll talk about is William Bryans. William Alexander Bryans was born in Fayette County on the 16th of December, 1845. His father was African American. His mother was of Irish descent. He was the son of Richard and Elizabeth Batch Bryans. In the 1850 census, William was living with his parents and 4 brothers and 2 sisters in Elizabeth Township, Allegheny County, where his father was recorded as a blacksmith. His father died when William was still young, and William was sent to live and work on the farm of William Brisbane in Westmoreland County, where he appears in the 1860 census. William enlisted 23rd August 1864 with Company K of the 127th U.S. Colored Infantry. If anyone has ever seen the movie Glory, you know that they originally did not allow African Americans to enlist, but after the 45th Massachusetts had proved that African Americans were more than capable of fighting, they did start to open up enlistments to colored soldiers, with the exception that any officer had to be white. The unit was involved in the battles of Deep Bottom, Hatcher's Run, Farmville, Petersburg, and Richmond. After the Confederate surrender, the 127th U.S. Colored Infantry was sent to Texas. So they would have been in Texas during Juneteenth, when the Union Army finally reached Galveston and the last of the African Americans were freed from slavery. His unit was mustered out on the 7th of September, 1865. William returned to southwestern Pennsylvania, and after mining coal for a time, he opened a barber shop at Elizabeth. Now, interestingly, in the 1850 and 1860 census, he was listed as mulatto, which means he was of mixed race. But after the war, he must have been light-skinned enough that they started to list him as white, Caucasian. So he moved his business to Turtle Creek in 1875. In addition to cutting hair, he sold newspapers, stationery, and tobacco, and was very successful. In May of 1876, he married Minnie, who was the daughter of Norman and Mary Sarver Bruce, and they had 3 children, William A., Clyde E., and Minroy A. According to the 1880 mortality census, Minnie died at the age of 23 in January of 1880. Their son Clyde died age 1 in April 1880, and their son Minroy died at the age of 2 months in January 1880. So in 4 months, William lost his wife and 2 of his sons. He remained in Turtle Creek working at his barber shop. In the 1910 census of Turtle Creek, he's recorded as the Justice of Peace. In 1923, he remarried to a woman named Rose Lord, and he died at his home on 340 Larimer Avenue on 30th November 1929 from heart and kidney disease. He was buried next to his beloved wife Minnie and 2 young children in the Crossroads Cemetery on the 4th of December 1929. I looked everywhere. I could not find a stone for him. I didn't know what to do. One day I happened to be in the cemetery, and I just happened to get the right lighting on the front of a gravestone, and I realized this was Minnie and the 2 sons that were buried, because I was just able to make up the last name Bryans. So I knew that he had been buried next to her. So working with the cemetery committee and the VA, we were able to get a gravestone erected over his grave that marks his service in the Colored Infantry. So now William and his wife are again marked properly. There was some indication that there was a soldier by the name of William Gill who had been buried in the cemetery, but I looked and looked and looked, and I could not find information really about him, and I could not find a stone for him until one day I just happened to realize that this was his stone. This was the stone of William Gill. And what first alerted me was, it's hard to see, but on the top there's a bent over flag on a flagstaff, and that is usually an indication that that was a soldier. William was born about 1831 in Allegheny County. He was the oldest son of Samuel and Rachel Eakin Gill. He appears with his parents in the 1850 census of Patton. He is 18 years old and working as a blacksmith. William Gill married Isabella A. Irvin on 22nd October 1854 at the Presbyterian Church in Monroeville. I actually found the affidavit from the minister that confirmed that. In the 1860 census, William and Isabella and their children Samuel and Eliza were living, and William was working as a blacksmith. Now, what really helped me out was, after he died, his wife Isabella filed an application for a widow's pension that gave me the information about when they were married and what unit he served in and how he died. William A. had been inducted into Company A of the Pennsylvania Drafted Militia on the 13th of July, 1863. While still encamped in Pennsylvania, he contracted typhoid and was given a 6-day pass to return to his home at Carpenter Station. Here he died on the 3rd of January, 1864, and was buried in the Gill family plot in the Crossroads Presbyterian Cemetery. As his privately purchased grave marker had become severely damaged, a new one was obtained from the VA. So this was the widow's declaration for a Civil War pension that Isabella had filed, and that she lists when they were married, the names and dates of birth of all their children, and the circumstances surrounding his death. And then using this, I was able to get the VA to give him a brand new stone to mark his service. So, last one. Not every stone needed to be repaired, not every stone needed to be replaced. But one of your soldiers had such an interesting service that I thought I would mention him last, and that was Elijah Price. Elijah Price was born in Swickley Township, Westmoreland County on the 27th of August, 1841. He was the oldest son of John and Ann Newland Price. His father was a farmer, and he had 4 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters. He mustered in with Company A, the 155th Pennsylvania Infantry, on the 23rd of August, 1862. And the 155th Pennsylvania was another one of those real fighting units. They were involved in many of the heavy battles. They participated in battles at Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, Mine Run, the Battle of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, Cold Harbor, and he was at Appomattox Courthouse when Lee was finally forced to surrender. Now, the bravery and fierceness of the 155th Pennsylvania was especially esteemed. During the Battle of Gettysburg, the Union generals realized that the Confederates were trying to come up a valley between where they were camped on Cemetery Hill and Little Round Top. And so they had to hurry up and rush soldiers over to Little Round Top to try to keep the Confederates from coming up through the valley. You all like my hand gestures? Do they help? The 155th led the charge to take Little Round Top and to keep and save the day. So because of their bravery and their fierceness in battle, they were honored by the honor of being issued a distinctive uniform called the Zouave uniform. The Zouave uniform, this was them taking back Round Top. The Zouave uniform was fashioned on a French military unit that had fought in Africa and that had been especially effective. Now, the normal uniform would be something similar to what I'm wearing today. This would be the sky blue pants, the dark blue shirt or jacket, and the dark blue hat. The Zouaves units were issued very distinctive uniforms that were meant as an honor. Personally, I don't know that I would have worn a red hat while I'm trying to be in the battle, but they considered it to be quite an honor. And I was actually able to find a black and white photo of Elijah in his uniform. So Elijah was mustered out with his company at the close of the war, 2nd January 1865. He returned to Westmoreland County and married Hetty Luce sometime around 1868. In the 1870 census for North Huntington, he was working as a farm laborer. They had known children of Edward, John, Annie, Bertie, Sadie, Lizzie, Albert, Jacob, George and Mabel. In 1880, the family was living in North Huntington. Elijah was 38 years old and working as a coal miner. By the 1900 census, Elijah and Hetty had moved to 3rd Street in Pitcairn, where he worked as a janitor in the public school. The census records indicated that Hetty had originally had 12 known children, but that only 8 were still living. In 1910, the family was living on Center Avenue in Pitcairn, and Elijah was working as a janitor for the YMCA. Elijah Price died in his home at 413 Center Avenue on the 29th of October, 1918, from a stroke. He was buried in the Crossroads Cemetery on the 31st of October, 1918. His wife, Hetty, remained in the township where she died on the 9th of September, 1933. And they still have a very beautiful stone that is still in perfect condition. So I would like to thank each and every one of you for your kind attention and for attending today. Like I said, this is one of my odd hobbies, and I enjoy talking about it, so I thank you. I would like to thank your cemetery committee and Martha Wintersgill for allowing me the honor and the privilege to be able to help to restore the memory of these veterans' service and their honor. And I would like to thank Pastor White for extending me the opportunity to speak with you all today about the history that lies buried in your church cemetery. Now, I have some displays set up. There is a display of some of the items that the Civil War soldiers would have had during their daily life. I also have some of the documentations that I used to obtain replacement stones for the soldiers. And I also have a listing, if anyone's interested, you can take them. This is a listing of all the known Civil War soldiers that I was able to positively identify in your cemetery. And also there's information up here. If any of you are descendants of Civil War soldiers, the sons of the Union veterans of the Civil War are always interested in obtaining new members or in trying to reach out to help people come in contact with their past. So there's information about that up here. Feel free to take them. And if there's any questions.
When you replace a stone, what do you do with the original one that you dig up?
VA regulations demand that any stone that is replaced, the old stone must be destroyed to the point where the name can no longer be read and must be discarded. So now I typically don't replace privately purchased stones unless in these cases those two stones were just mush. There wasn't anything that could be done with them.
I want to thank you so much. It's incredible what you've done for these families and for, the history of our cemetery. Just amazing. Thank you so much.
I have a question. Are the headstones that you get as replacements similar to the ones like in Arlington?
Most of the ones that will be in Arlington will be marble.
Okay.
I get the granite ones because they should, one, last longer, and two, Arlington has an entire staff that are maintaining all the stones and cleaning them. These should not require too much fuss over the next few years,
Okay.
hopefully.
Yeah, the mapping that we have for the cemetery now, there's certain lots and section numbers and things like that. When you found the stone, did that help reorient that map? And was that able to help you locate any of the other burial sites?
I didn't really work with the map. I mostly just walked around looking to try to find the stones. There is only one stone. I mean, if you do have a map, there is one stone I cannot figure out who it was. I know it was a Civil War vet because of the size and shape of the stone. It came from the Allegheny County VA department. but they're completely destroyed, and I can't read who's on it. But if the maps, if identifying these replacement stones will help with the map, it should be pretty easy because they're very distinctive stones.
My second great grandfather was a Civil War soldier, and he is buried in Indiana County. We know where the grave is. And we have been here, say, on Memorial Day, whatever. And there is a group, I don't know whether it's some group in that area, who always puts flags on the graves of soldiers on Memorial Day or whatever, or a wreath or something. And he never has, there's never a flag or wreath on that grave, or my great grandfather. Who would I get in contact with? Maybe if there's nothing on the gravestone that says Civil War soldier.
My thought would be they probably don't know that he served.
Yeah.
I would ask either a local American Legion or local VFW if they know who is putting the flags, and see if your ancestor's name could be put on that list.
Okay.
You could try to privately purchase one of the GAR flag holders. You can get them for about $15 on the Sons of Union Veterans Civil War site, or you can purchase them elsewhere, or you can just ask the American Legion or whoever's out there, can you just please put a flag marker on the grave? They'll probably put a generic U.S. veteran marker, but that would help to show that this deceased person did serve.
Okay.
Do you use ground penetrating radar in any of your investigations, so you don't have to dig down real far to find stuff?
I wish I could. I wish I could. I don't have one. That can be very expensive. One of the best uses of it would be to go through this entire cemetery, especially the older section. It will show you, it won't show you the bodies or who's buried there, but it will show you where graves have been dug. But I myself have never used it.
Okay. We were told by somebody who runs that our soil's wrong for that. It's too high conductivity.
Okay.
Oh, that you can't use that.
Well, I will stay around. Please feel free to look at the displays. If you have any questions, please come find me. I'm more than happy to talk about this at length. Thank you.
I heard it. That was the story that I heard from somebody mentioned.
Yeah, they got rid of a lot of people.
We